Alien King's mother was injured and left to die on a frigid cold desert. Until a human medic saved her, the winds of Zithra were merciless. Jagged ice shards cut across the barren desert, carried by storms that seemed to howl with fury. The sun barely rose above the horizon, casting pale, ghostly light over the endless frozen dunes. Amid this wasteland, a lone figure struggled forward, her strength failing with every step. She was the queen of the Zarathian Empire, the mother of the crown prince, and yet here she was, alone and gravely wounded, left to die on a planet that offered no mercy. Her body ached with every movement. The attackers had been ruthless, striking quickly and disappearing just as fast. Her guards had fallen, either killed or driven away, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. She tried to focus, ignoring the burning pain in her side and the shivering that racked her alien body. Each breath she took felt like inhaling shards of ice, but she could not stop. Survival was not just instinct, it was her duty. If she died here, the Empire would lose not only a leader but a symbol of hope and unity. She could not allow that to happen. The ice beneath her feet was unstable, cracking and shifting as if trying to swallow her whole. She stumbled, catching herself against a jagged ridge of frozen rock. Her vision blurred, the world around her turning into a swirl of white and shadow. Memories of the attack flashed through her mind, flashy bursts of energy, the roar of engines, and the terrified cries of her guards. She had fought to protect her people, but there had been too many. She had been separated, left behind, and now the cold desert was her prison. For hours or perhaps days she wandered. Time seemed meaningless in this frozen expanse. Her strength ebbed with every step. Hunger gnawed at her, though the pain of her injuries was far worse. She had a small survival pack with minimal supplies, but it was almost empty. Her own advanced biology kept her alive longer than a human might have survived, but even her resilience had limits. She knew she could not continue indefinitely. She needed help, or she would die here, forgotten and alone. As she stumbled across another ridge, she caught a faint glimmer on the horizon. At first, she thought it was a mirage, a trick of her weakened mind. But the light remained, steady and deliberate. Curiosity and desperation pushed her forward. She moved slowly, carefully, knowing that one wrong step could send her tumbling into a deep crevasse. The closer she got, the more she realized the source of the light was not natural. It was mechanical, something artificial, a human device. A pod of some kind, partially buried in the snow and frost. The sight sparked something within her. She had heard stories of humans, fragile, soft, but intelligent and resourceful. Few Zarathians had ever encountered them, and most considered them weak. Yet here, in the middle of a frozen desert, the presence of a human device suggested that there might be hope. She forced herself forward, ignoring the pain and exhaustion that threatened to stop her. Inside the pod, a man was working frantically. He moved with purpose, adjusting instruments, scanning the environment, and occasionally looking up at the storm outside. He was human, and unlike most of her people would expect, he seemed entirely unafraid of the cold. His focus was absolute and his movements precise. The queen felt a strange mixture of relief and caution. Could she trust him? Could a human really help her survive? She stepped closer, weakly lifting a hand as if to signal her presence. The man turned at the sound, his eyes widening in surprise. He took in the sight before him, a figure unlike any human, battered and pale from the cold, with injuries that could have killed a lesser being. He did not hesitate. Without a word, he activated a small emergency field around her, blocking the wind and stabilizing the temperature just enough to prevent her from freezing completely. "Hold still," he said softly, his voice calm and steady. "I'm going to help you." The queen's mind reeled. She did not understand his words fully. Humans spoke differently, but the tone conveyed care, competence, and intent. She allowed herself to fall forward slightly, trusting instinct over logic. His hands were careful but firm as he assessed her injuries. Blood had frozen along the edges of torn clothing and skin, and her breathing was shallow. Without hesitation, he began to work, using tools she had never seen before, devices that hummed and glowed as they treated her wounds with alien precision. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. The storm continued to rage outside, but within the small protective field, the queen felt warmth returning to her body. Pain subsided slightly, replaced by a dull ache and a cautious hope. She observed the human closely, fascinated by his diligence. He did not flinch or complain despite the harsh environment. Every move was calculated, every action deliberate. Here was a being that should have been weaker, and yet he displayed courage and skill beyond what many Zarathians could achieve. Finally, he stepped back, letting her rest. "You'll live," he said, nodding once. "But you need to keep moving if you want to survive fully. The storm will pass, but the cold isn't done yet." The queen could only nod, too exhausted to speak. She studied him, curiosity replacing suspicion. Humans were unpredictable and often underestimated, yet here one had defied every expectation. He had saved her life when no one else would. Gratitude stirred within her, along with a strange new understanding. Strength was not only about muscle or endurance. It was about ingenuity, perseverance, and the will to act when others would hesitate. She tried to communicate her thanks, using gestures and simple sounds. The human seemed to understand, his expression softening. He offered her water and some rations from his pack, which she accepted. The warmth of food and drink was comforting, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to relax slightly. She was still weak, but she was no longer alone. The thought brought a spark of hope that she had not felt since the ambush. As the storm began to wane, the human helped her out of the pod and onto a slightly more stable area of the desert. Together, they moved carefully, the queen leaning on him for support. Every step was a battle, but she found that with his guidance, she could keep going. They encountered deep snowdrifts and treacherous ice, but he used tools and makeshift bridges to help her across. Each time she faltered, he was there, steady and reassuring. Slowly, she realized that survival was no longer a solitary struggle. It was a partnership, forged not by similarity but by necessity and shared determination. The queen's mind wandered as they moved. She thought of her son, the crown prince, and the empire he would one day lead. She thought of her people, unaware of her fate and relying on her survival. She realized that her trust in the human was not a weakness, it was a recognition of capability. Here was a being who could make a difference, who could change outcomes where raw strength alone could not. And in that realization, she felt a quiet admiration, mingled with relief and curiosity. Night fell over Zithra, darker than most nights, with icy winds swirling around them. The human led her to a small crevice in the ice, where the walls offered some protection from the wind. He set up a temporary shelter using advanced human materials, creating a small pocket of warmth and light. Inside, he monitored her vitals with devices she had never seen, adjusting energy flow and temperature to stabilize her further. She watched him work, fascinated by the skill and care he displayed. It was clear that he valued life, even one so different from his own. She had survived the storm, survived the attack, and now she might survive Zithro itself. The queen realized that her perception of humans had changed. They were not merely weak creatures to be dismissed. They were clever, resourceful, and capable of acts of courage that could rival the greatest of her own people. And this human, had proven it without hesitation. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the queen allowed herself to close her eyes, letting exhaustion claim her. The human remained vigilant, keeping watch as the storm raged outside. In that moment, a quiet understanding passed between them. Words were not necessary. She would survive, and he had made it possible. And though she did not yet know the future, She felt a spark of hope, the first in a long time, that perhaps the trials of Zithra were not the end of her story, but the beginning of a new chapter, one in which humans, her people, and the harshness of the universe itself would all play a part. The winds howled, the snow fell, and the queen rested, fragile but alive. And somewhere in the icy darkness, a human medic watched over her, steadfast and unwavering, a silent guardian in a world that had almost claimed her. The sun barely broke through the icy clouds of Zithra, casting pale light over the frozen desert. The storm from the previous night had left the land even harsher, the winds sharper and the snow deeper. The queen, still weak from her injuries and the brutal attack, awoke to find the human medic, Elia's heart, tending to her carefully. His hands moved with precision, adjusting the temperature of her temporary shelter and checking her vitals. She had slept better than she had in days, and for a moment she felt almost safe. Almost. Her eyes traced his movements. Elias worked silently, focused entirely on her well-being, and she watched him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Humans were unpredictable, often underestimated, and yet this one had proven his strength through intelligence and endurance. He had saved her life once, but the desert was still full of danger. She could not yet trust completely, and she knew her survival depended on remaining alert. "You are awake," he said softly, glancing at her. His accent was thick but clear, and though she did not fully understand every word, the meaning was obvious. "You need to eat something. Your strength is low." He handed her a small container of rations. She accepted it, grateful for the warmth it offered. As she ate slowly, she studied him. There was something about humans that was surprising, an energy and determination that made them remarkable, even fragile as they seemed. Elias had been on Zithra for several months, studying the planet's harsh environment and helping establish temporary outposts for scientific and humanitarian purposes. He had faced dangers before, but nothing had prepared him for encountering a being like her, wounded and left to die in the most unforgiving conditions imaginable. And yet, he had not hesitated. He had used his knowledge, his tools, and his ingenuity to stabilize her, to give her a chance to survive. She finished her small meal, and Elias helped her to her feet. Her muscles were stiff, and every movement reminded her of the injuries she carried. Still, she forced herself to walk, leaning on him for support. The desert was still treacherous. Snowdrifts blocked their path, and hidden cracks in the ice could collapse under their weight. Elias moved with ease, scanning the ground, testing the stability of each step. The queen followed, her trust in him growing incrementally with every careful movement. Hours passed, and they covered only a short distance. The queen's strength was limited, and the cold gnawed at them both. But Elias seemed tireless, guiding her through the harsh landscape with a combination of experience, intuition, and ingenuity. He used portable heat devices, sensors, and even repurposed parts from his pod to create safe paths through the snow and ice. The queen marveled at his skill. He was human, yet his resourcefulness allowed him to survive and help her survive where many Zarathians would have failed. As the afternoon approached, they encountered a new challenge. A deep crevasse split the ice like a jagged wound, nearly invisible under a thin layer of snow. The queen froze, recognizing the danger immediately. One misstep could send her plummeting into the depths below. Elias knelt beside her, setting up a small bridge made of lightweight yet strong material. "Step slowly," he instructed. "I will guide you." The queen hesitated, her alien pride clashing with the necessity of accepting help. Finally, she nodded. Trusting him was no longer optional, it was survival. Carefully, she placed one foot on the bridge, then another as Elias steadied her. Halfway across, a gust of wind threatened to topple them. Her heart raced, but Elias' hand was firm and steady. "Keep going." "You're doing well," he encouraged. With each step, she felt a growing respect for his courage and ingenuity. By the time they reached the other side, She realized that humans could face dangers with a combination of wit, determination, and calm resolve that rivaled even the strongest of Zarathians. The sun began to set, and the temperature dropped sharply. The queen shivered despite her natural resilience, and Elias quickly built another temporary shelter, this one slightly larger to protect them both from the night winds. Inside, he checked her injuries again, applying new treatments to prevent infection. She watched him, fascinated. Each movement was deliberate, each decision calculated. He did not act rashly, and yet he adapted quickly to challenges as they arose. For hours, they remained inside the shelter, speaking in broken but understandable ways. The queen learned some of his words. He learned some of her gestures. Communication was slow but effective. They shared small stories of their lives, her as a leader and mother, him as a medic and explorer. The more she listened, the more she realized that humans were capable of understanding and empathy, not just survival. This realization was unsettling but enlightening. Her people often underestimated humans, dismissing them as weak. But this human had shown her that weakness was not a measure of worth or capability. Night deepened, and the desert grew even more hostile. Howling winds battered the shelter, rattling the thin walls. The queen felt a flicker of fear, but Elias remained calm, his presence reassuring. He had survived many storms on Zithra, but this one was different. He was responsible for another life now, and he would not fail. Together they monitored the environment, using sensors to predict shifts in wind and snow, ensuring they would remain safe through the night. Sleep came in short, fitful bursts. The queen's mind wandered to her son, the crown prince, and the empire she had sworn to protect. Would he find out what had happened? Would the attackers succeed in their treachery? She did not know, and the thought filled her with unease. Yet, for the first time in days, she felt hope. Survival was possible. She had been given a second chance, thanks to a being she had once dismissed. Morning arrived, bringing with it another test. The storm had passed, but the landscape was treacherous. Snow had shifted, ice had cracked, and new hazards appeared with each step. Elias was prepared, using a combination of human tools and improvisation to find a safe path. The queen followed closely, her body still weak but growing stronger with each movement. She began to appreciate the subtle ways humans approach challenges, calculating risks, observing carefully, and using intellect to overcome obstacles. As they moved, they came across signs of life, strange, alien creatures adapted to the frigid desert. Most were harmless, but a few were dangerous, hunting in packs and striking with speed. Elias reacted quickly, using non-lethal methods to distract and repel the creatures. The queen was impressed. Many Zarathians would have attacked outright, relying on strength alone. Elias' approach was precise, clever, and effective. He protected her without unnecessary violence, and in that moment she realized that humans were not only capable of surviving, but also of understanding and respecting life in ways her own people sometimes overlooked. By midday, they reached a small plateau, slightly elevated and less exposed to the wind. Elias suggested they rest, allowing the queen to regain some strength before continuing. As she sat, she studied him more closely. His face was weathered, eyes sharp and alert, hands calloused from work. He was ordinary in appearance but extraordinary in action. She felt a growing admiration, tempered by caution. Trust had to be earned, and he had earned some of it, though not all. They spoke in fragments, sharing observations about the terrain and plans for survival. The queen realized that communication, cooperation, and mutual respect were as critical as physical strength. Elias listened to her suggestions, adapted quickly, and incorporated her knowledge of survival in alien environments. Together, they formed a team, each learning from the other. She began to understand that this partnership might be the key to surviving not just Zithra, but the treachery that had left her stranded in the first place. As the sun began to set again, painting the icy landscape in shades of gold and silver, they continued their journey. The queen felt stronger, more confident, yet aware of her vulnerability. Elias remained vigilant, scanning the horizon for threats and guiding her carefully. Each step was a lesson in trust, resilience, and respect. She realized that survival was not a solitary struggle. It was a collaboration, forged through courage, ingenuity, and shared determination. That night, as they set up their shelter once more, the queen allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had been abandoned, left to die, yet she had survived. She had been saved by a human, a being she had once underestimated. And in that realization she felt something new, a quiet hope, a sense that perhaps the universe had more to offer than pain and betrayal. Perhaps with allies like Elias, even a queen of the Zarathian Empire could endure the harshest deserts, face the deadliest foes, and emerge stronger. Elias watched her as she rested, understanding without words that this was more than survival. It was the beginning of trust, the first step in a journey that would change both of their lives, and perhaps the course of entire civilizations. In the cold, desolate desert of Zithra, a human and an alien began to forge a bond that would defy expectations, challenge prejudice, and redefine what it meant to survive and to thrive. The icy winds of Zithra whipped across the plateau, carrying snow that stung the skin like tiny needles. The queen leaned heavily on Elias as they moved forward, her body still recovering but her spirit growing stronger. The previous days had taught her a harsh lesson. Survival was never easy, and Zithra offered no mercy. Yet despite the cold and exhaustion, she found a growing sense of determination. She would not die here, abandoned and forgotten, not while Elias walked beside her. Elias had proven to be an extraordinary guide. His understanding of the terrain, his careful planning, and his resourcefulness had kept them both alive so far. But the desert held more challenges than just snowstorms and freezing winds. Every step forward brought new dangers, some visible, some hidden. The plateau gave them a temporary advantage, its elevation providing a slightly clearer view of the surrounding land. Still, the queen's keen eyes, trained over decades of leadership, noticed subtle signs of potential threats: unusual tracks in the snow, a faint shimmer of movement near the cliffs, and a sudden, unnatural silence that made the hair on her neck stand on end. "Be careful," she whispered, her voice hoarse but firm. "Something is nearby." Elias nodded, his expression calm but alert. "I see it too," he said. "Stay close and follow my lead." Together they moved cautiously. A group of native predators, adapted to Zithra's frozen environment, emerged from the shadows of the cliffs. These creatures were unlike anything the queen had encountered before, tall, agile, with icy white fur and claws capable of cutting through the hardest ice. They prowled silently, circling the humans like ghosts, their glowing eyes fixed on potential prey. Elias did not panic. Instead, he reached into his pack and retrieved a small device, which emitted a series of high-frequency pulses. The predators recoiled, hesitating as the waves disrupted their hunting instincts. The queen watched in awe. Humans were fragile in body but powerful in intellect. His clever use of technology had turned the tables, keeping them safe without engaging in unnecessary combat. She realized that this ingenuity was just as formidable as brute strength, and perhaps even more effective in certain situations. The predators eventually retreated, confused and frustrated. Elias lowered the device, breathing a quiet sigh of relief. "That was close," he said. "We need to keep moving before more of them arrive." The queen nodded. Every encounter reinforced her growing respect for him. He was more than a medic. He was a strategist, a survivor, and a protector. Yet she also knew that danger was far from over. Zithra's desert was not just cold. It was alive, constantly testing those who dared to cross it. And the queen, though recovering, was still vulnerable. She had to stay vigilant, and she had to trust Elias completely if she wanted to survive. As they continued, they encountered a deep canyon that split the plateau. The path ahead was treacherous, with narrow ledges and icy overhangs. The Queen's injuries made crossing difficult, and one misstep could be fatal. Elias examined the canyon carefully, using a combination of tools and observation to find the safest route. He extended a hand to the Queen. "Take it slowly," he instructed. "I'll guide you across." Her alien physiology allowed her to balance more effectively than most humans, but the weight of her injuries made the task daunting. Step by step, she moved across the ledge, following his guidance. A sudden gust of wind threatened to unbalance her, but Elias' hand was steady, holding her firmly. When they finally reached the other side, the Queen let out a long breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. She felt a surge of gratitude and admiration for this human, whose calm intellect and careful planning had saved her once again. For the next few hours, they pressed onward, navigating a maze of frozen cliffs and ice tunnels. The Queen learned to anticipate his actions, understanding the subtle cues he used to detect danger. In turn, Elias began to recognize her instincts, which were honed by years of leadership and survival in her own harsh world. They moved as a team, their skills complementing each other. The Queen's strength and perception combined with Elias' ingenuity and experience to overcome obstacles that neither could manage alone. As they rested briefly in a small alcove, the Queen's mind wandered to the events that had brought her here. The ambush had been swift and merciless. Her guards had fallen, the attackers had fled, and she had been left alone in a frozen wasteland. Anger and betrayal had filled her at first, but those feelings had shifted into a quiet determination. She would survive. She had to survive, not just for herself, but for her son and the empire he would one day lead. And now, with Elias at her side, survival seemed possible. Their brief rest was interrupted by a low rumble. The ground beneath them trembled slightly, sending small shards of ice falling from the ceiling of the alcove. Elias' eyes narrowed as he scanned the area. "An avalanche," he said quietly. "We need to move, now." The Queen stood quickly, though pain shot through her side. Elias led her out of the alcove, guiding her across narrow ledges and over icy slopes. The rumble grew louder, the snow above them beginning to shift and collapse. The Queen's heart pounded, but she followed his instructions without hesitation. His confidence and calm reassured her, even as the avalanche roared around them. They reached a safer area just as a massive wave of snow and ice crashed through the alcove, obliterating the path they had just crossed. The Queen sank to her knees, exhausted but alive. Elias knelt beside her, checking her for injuries. She shook her head. "Thanks to you," she said softly, her voice filled with quiet awe. The night that followed was merciless. Temperatures dropped sharply, and the winds howled like predators themselves. Elias built another temporary shelter, this one reinforced with ice blocks and his portable heating devices. Inside, he monitored the Queen's condition, adjusting her treatments and ensuring that she remained stable. She watched him work, amazed at his dedication. He was human, yet he displayed a level of care, resilience, and ingenuity that rivaled even the most capable Zarathians. During the long night, they spoke quietly. The Queen shared fragments of her life, her responsibilities, and her worries for her son and her empire. Elias shared stories of his travels, his studies of Zithra, and the humans who had trained him to endure extreme environments. Their communication was slow and fragmented, but it was meaningful. They were learning from each other, bridging the gap between species with understanding, respect, and shared experience. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving a cold, clear sky. The Queen felt stronger, her body healing under Elias' careful attention. She knew that their journey was far from over. Zithra still held dangers, both environmental and sentient. Rival factions, native predators and the harsh elements continued to pose threats. But for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. With Elias by her side, she had a chance to survive and return to her people. They pressed onward, moving cautiously through the frozen landscape. At times, the queen marveled at Elias' ingenuity, how he used simple tools in clever ways, how he adapted quickly to unforeseen challenges, and how he remained calm under pressure. She realized that strength was not just physical. Humans, though seemingly fragile, possessed a remarkable combination of intelligence, creativity, and courage. Elias embodied these traits fully, and she had come to trust him implicitly. Hours later, they came upon a ridge overlooking a frozen valley. The sight was both beautiful and treacherous. The valley below was dotted with jagged ice formations, deep crevasses, and snow-covered cliffs. Crossing it would be perilous, but it offered a path toward safety. Elias studied the terrain carefully, identifying a route that minimized risk. "We can make it," he said, his voice steady. "But we need to move carefully and stick together." The queen nodded, her resolve firm. Step by step, they descended into the valley, navigating the dangerous terrain with a combination of caution and skill. At one point, a sudden shift in the ice forced the queen to leap to a small ledge. Elia's hand shot out to steady her, and she realized that trust was no longer optional. It was essential. They were partners in survival, relying on each other in ways neither had anticipated. As night approached again, they found a sheltered area near a small outcropping of rock. Elias set up the shelter, and the queen rested, feeling the fatigue of the day weigh heavily upon her. Yet, despite the exhaustion, she felt a growing sense of determination. She had survived storms, predators, and treacherous terrain. She had survived because of her strength, her instincts, and the remarkable human beside her. In the quiet of the night, the queen reflected on the journey so far. She had been abandoned, left to die, yet she had survived. She had been saved by a human, a being she had once dismissed as weak and fragile. And now she realized that humans could be extraordinary allies, capable of courage, ingenuity, and compassion. With Elias at her side, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would survive Zithra, she would return to her son and her people, and she would do so with a new understanding of the strength that humans could possess. The night passed without incident, the stars above shining cold and distant. The queen slept more soundly than she had in days, her body healing and her mind growing stronger. Elias remained vigilant, a steady guardian in the icy desert. Together they had faced Zithra's challenges and emerged stronger. And though the journey ahead remained perilous, the queen knew that she was no longer alone. With the first light of dawn, they prepared to continue their journey. The desert stretched endlessly before them, but they moved forward with determination, each step a testament to resilience, courage, and the bond forming between them. The queen had been abandoned, left to die, but now she walked beside a human who had proven that survival was not just about strength. It was about ingenuity, cooperation, and the unwavering will to endure. On Zithra, the frozen desert tested all who dared to cross it. But together, the queen and Elias had shown that even in the harshest conditions, hope, courage, and determination could prevail. And as they pressed onward, neither knew exactly what challenges lay ahead, but both knew that together they could face anything. The icy winds of Zithra had calmed for the moment, leaving the desert silent except for the crunch of snow beneath their feet. The queen and Elias moved cautiously, navigating the frozen expanse with care. Days of travel had strengthened their partnership. The queen trusted his judgment implicitly, and Elias respected her instincts and keen perception. Together, they had survived storms, predators, and treacherous terrain. Yet neither could shake the feeling that something more dangerous lay ahead. Their fears were soon realized. A distant shimmer of movement caught the queen's eye, a faint glint in the sunlight reflecting off metal. She signaled Elias to stop, crouching low and observing. In the distance, a group of figures emerged, rival Zarathian mercenaries sent by the faction that had ambushed her convoy. Their intentions were clear: capture or kill the queen and ensure their political advantage. Elias studied the figures through his optical device. "They're heavily armed," he said quietly. "We need to avoid them if we can, or at least be smart about how we face them." The queen's mind raced. Her strength was returning, but her injuries still limited her mobility. Engaging in direct combat would be risky, even with Elias by her side. Yet she could not simply flee. The mercenaries would pursue relentlessly, and the desert offered few places to hide. She weighed their options carefully, realizing that strategy and ingenuity were their best tools. Elias noticed her hesitation. "We can use the terrain to our advantage," he suggested. "There's a narrow canyon nearby. If we can lure them there, their numbers won't matter as much." The queen nodded, impressed by his thinking. Humans were often underestimated, but Elias had repeatedly demonstrated that intelligence could outweigh raw strength. Together, they moved quietly toward the canyon, careful to leave no trace of their passage. Their synchronization was almost instinctive now. They communicated through subtle gestures and brief phrases, anticipating each other's movements. As they approached the canyon entrance, the mercenaries became aware of their presence. Shouts echoed across the icy landscape, and weapons discharged in warning. The queen felt a surge of adrenaline, her body reacting instinctively. She had survived countless battles in her lifetime, but never in such an alien environment. Elia's steady presence beside her allowed her to focus, channeling her energy and skill into survival rather than fear. They slipped into the canyon, its narrow walls providing both cover and a strategic advantage. Elias positioned himself to block the entrance, using portable energy barriers and sensors to manipulate the terrain. The mercenaries followed, unaware of the trap that awaited them. When they entered the narrow pass, Elias activated the barriers, forcing the attackers into a confined space where their numbers could not overwhelm the queen and him. The queen moved with precision, her alien agility allowing her to dodge attacks and counter with strength where necessary. Elias used human ingenuity, employing traps, decoys, and environmental hazards to neutralize threats without unnecessary violence. Their coordination was seamless, a blend of intellect, instinct, and resilience. Together, they turned what could have been a deadly encounter into a controlled engagement, demonstrating that clever strategy often outweighed brute force. The mercenaries, frustrated and disoriented, attempted to retreat, but the canyon's narrow paths and Elias' barriers prevented escape. One by one, they were incapacitated or forced to surrender. The queen observed, impressed by Elias' calm under pressure. He was human, yet he had orchestrated their defense with precision and confidence, turning a perilous situation into a manageable one. After the encounter, the queen allowed herself a moment to rest. She was tired, her body sore from injuries and exertion, but alive. Elias checked her condition, adjusting her treatments and ensuring she was stable. She studied him, realizing that survival was as much about mindset as physical capability. Humans, fragile as they appeared, possessed a remarkable combination of ingenuity, adaptability, and courage. Elias embodied these traits fully, and she had come to rely on them implicitly. They continued their journey, moving with caution but renewed confidence. The desert stretched endlessly before them, but they were no longer merely surviving. They were thriving, using strategy, intellect, and cooperation to overcome challenges. Along the way, they encountered remnants of abandoned outposts and traces of previous travelers, evidence that survival in Zithra required constant vigilance and innovation. Elias adapted quickly, repurposing materials and using his knowledge to navigate and survive. Night fell, bringing with it another drop in temperature. The queen shivered despite her natural resilience, and Elias quickly built a temporary shelter using ice blocks, portable heating devices, and durable fabric. Inside, he monitored her condition, checking her injuries and ensuring that she remained stable. They spoke quietly, exchanging observations about the terrain, potential dangers, and their own experiences. Communication was slow but meaningful, a bridge between two species learning to trust and rely on each other. The queen reflected on the events that had brought her here. She had been ambushed, abandoned, and left to die, yet she had survived. Her gratitude for Elia's intervention was profound, but it was more than gratitude. It was respect, admiration, and recognition of human capability. She realized that her people had underestimated humans for too long, dismissing them as weak. Elias had shown her that humans could be resourceful, brave, and intelligent, capable of achieving feats that even the strongest Zarathians might struggle with. As they rested, they discussed their next steps. The queen knew she could not return to the Zarathian Empire alone. Her injuries, the harsh desert, and the persistent threat of rivals made that impossible. Elias suggested seeking a human outpost or contacting friendly forces who could provide safe passage. The queen agreed, understanding that collaboration was essential for survival. Together, they devised a plan that balanced caution, strategy, and speed, ensuring that they could move efficiently while minimizing risk. The following day, they continued their journey, navigating a series of icy ridges and narrow valleys. They encountered small packs of native predators, but Elias' ingenuity and the queen's agility allowed them to avoid or neutralize each threat. Each challenge reinforced their growing trust and cooperation. The queen began to understand that survival was not merely about strength or skill. It was about adaptability, intelligence, and the ability to work together. Elias exemplified these qualities, and she relied on him increasingly with each passing day. By midday, they reached the edge of a frozen river, its surface cracked and unstable. Crossing it would be dangerous, but it offered a shortcut toward the human outpost Elias had identified. He assessed the ice carefully, using portable scanners to identify safe paths. The queen followed his guidance, stepping cautiously across the treacherous surface. Halfway through, the ice shifted unexpectedly and she nearly fell. Elias reacted instantly, grabbing her and steadying her with precision. She realized then that trust was no longer optional, it was essential for survival. Once across, they paused to rest and recover. The queen's strength was returning, and she felt a renewed sense of determination. She had survived storms, predators, treacherous terrain, and rival mercenaries. Each challenge had tested her endurance, courage, and resilience, but she had endured them all with Elias by her side. Humans, fragile as they appeared, had proven themselves capable of incredible feats when intelligence, resourcefulness, and courage were applied. Elias had demonstrated this repeatedly, earning her respect and trust in equal measure. As night fell, they set up another temporary shelter. The desert was silent, but both remained vigilant. Elias monitored the environment, adjusting heating devices and energy barriers to ensure safety. The queen watched him work, reflecting on the bond that had developed between them. They had faced life-threatening challenges together, relying on each other's strengths to survive. What had begun as a chance encounter had transformed into a partnership built on mutual respect, trust, and shared determination. The queen's thoughts turned to her son, the crown prince, and the Zarathian Empire. She knew that her survival was not only a personal matter, it had implications for the future of her people. The betrayal she had suffered, the ambush that had left her stranded, was part of a larger struggle for power. Returning safely would allow her to guide her son, strengthen alliances, and ensure the stability of the empire. Yet she also knew that she could not accomplish this alone. Elias, the human who had saved her life and proven himself capable in countless ways, was now an essential part of her survival and her future plans. Throughout the night, the queen rested while Elias kept watch. She slept more soundly than she had in days, her body healing and her mind growing stronger. He remained vigilant, a silent guardian in the icy desert. Together, they had faced threats from both the environment and other beings, and together they had survived. By dawn, the queen felt stronger than she had in weeks. Her injuries had healed significantly, her strength returning gradually. She stood beside Elias, looking out across the frozen expanse. The human outpost they sought lay in the distance, a small cluster of structures partially hidden by snow and ice. Reaching it would not be easy. They would still face predators, unstable terrain, and possibly other mercenaries, but they were prepared. Their experiences had taught them how to navigate the harshest conditions, how to anticipate danger, and how to rely on each other. The journey ahead would test them further, but the queen felt a quiet confidence. She had survived impossible odds, and she had learned that humans, despite their apparent fragility, possessed extraordinary qualities. Elias had shown her courage, ingenuity, and unwavering determination. Together, they were stronger than the sum of their parts, capable of overcoming the challenges that Zithra and their enemies could throw at them. Step by step, they moved forward, navigating the frozen desert with care and precision. The queen felt a sense of purpose growing within her. She had been abandoned, left to die, yet she had survived. She had been saved by a human, and in doing so, she had discovered a new understanding of trust, cooperation, and resilience. The future was uncertain, but she was no longer powerless. With Elias at her side, she had a chance to return to her people, face her enemies, and reshape her destiny. The desert stretched endlessly before them, cold and unforgiving. But the queen and Elias moved forward, united by necessity, trust, and growing respect. They had faced storms, predators, and rival mercenaries, and they had survived. The challenges ahead would be no less formidable, but together they were ready. On Zithra, survival required more than strength or skill. It demanded intelligence, courage, and the ability to rely on others. The queen had learned this lesson well, and she had found an ally in the most unlikely of beings, a human named Elias Hart. Together, they would face whatever lay ahead, proving that hope, determination, and ingenuity could overcome even the harshest odds. The frozen landscape of Zithra stretched endlessly before them, pale light reflecting off the jagged ice like shards of glass. The queen, now stronger and more alert than she had been since the ambush, moved steadily beside Elias. The hardships of the past days had tested her body, her mind, and her spirit, yet she had endured them all. Each step toward the distant human outpost was a step closer to safety, a step closer to returning to her son and her empire. But she knew that even now, the desert would not yield its challenges easily. Elias led the way with careful precision, scanning the terrain with his sensors and adjusting their path to avoid treacherous ice cracks and hidden crevasses. The queen followed closely, her trust in him now absolute. She had learned to rely not just on her own strength, but also on human ingenuity, patience, and foresight. Elias had saved her life multiple times, using intelligence and clever strategies to navigate dangers that would have overwhelmed many Zarathians. She had come to understand that survival was more than brute force. It required foresight, adaptability, and cooperation. As they approached a narrow pass between two frozen cliffs, a sudden roar echoed through the valley. The queen froze instinctively, recognizing the sound as a predator native to Zithra. These creatures were massive, with translucent ice-like fur that camouflaged them perfectly against the snow, sharp claws, and piercing eyes that glowed in the pale light. Elias moved quickly, activating a device that emitted high-frequency pulses to disorient the creature. The predator hesitated, confused by the unfamiliar sound. The queen took a deep breath and drew on her own strength. She had been injured and exhausted, but survival had sharpened her instincts and honed her reflexes. When the predator lunged at them despite the pulse, she moved with agility and precision, using a combination of strength and strategy to avoid its strikes. Elias flanked the creature, employing traps and clever distractions. Together, human ingenuity and Zarathian power worked in harmony, subduing the threat without unnecessary harm. The encounter left the queen exhilarated and exhausted. She realized that her perception of humans had been entirely transformed. They were fragile in appearance, yet capable of intelligence, courage, and resilience that could rival the most powerful Zarathians. Elias had proven this repeatedly, and in the harshest environment of Zithra, his skills had become as vital to her survival as her own strength. They continued onward, moving carefully through the icy desert. Each step was deliberate, each decision measured. Elias had identified a route that would bring them closer to the human outpost while minimizing exposure to predators and rival factions. The queen observed him closely, learning to anticipate his actions and understanding the subtle ways he assessed danger. Their partnership had evolved into something seamless, a blend of intellect, instinct, and trust forged in the crucible of survival. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, they reached a small ridge overlooking the outpost. It was a cluster of domed structures partially buried in snow, with faint lights indicating human activity. The site was a beacon of hope, yet the queen knew the journey was not over. Rival factions could still be nearby, and the desert itself remained unpredictable. She and Elias would need to approach carefully to avoid drawing attention. Elias crouched, signaling for the queen to do the same. He scanned the area, identifying patrol routes, energy shields, and potential hazards. "We can make it," he whispered. "But we need to move slowly and stay low. They'll notice us if we're careless." The queen nodded, following his guidance with precision. Step by step, they navigated the final stretch, their movements quiet and deliberate. The human outpost loomed closer, its walls providing both shelter and protection. The queen felt a surge of anticipation. Safety was within reach, and soon she would be able to recover fully and plan her return to her empire. As they approached the entrance, a sudden disturbance caught Elias' attention. A small patrol of mercenaries from the rival faction had detected movement near the outpost. Elias reacted quickly, using a combination of decoys and energy pulses to distract and mislead them. The queen watched in awe as he orchestrated the maneuver with precision, ensuring their approach remained undetected. Her respect for humans, and for Elias in particular, deepened with each action. They reached the outpost safely, and human guards quickly recognized the queen. Despite her alien appearance, the medtech she carried and her cautious approach signaled that she posed no threat. Elias assisted her inside, where warmth and shelter immediately eased the fatigue and cold that had plagued her for days. Inside, the queen was able to rest and recover fully, her injuries tended to with proper medical care. During her recovery, she reflected on the journey and the bond that had formed between her and Elias. She had been abandoned, left to die on Zithra's frozen desert, yet she had survived. She had been saved not by brute force, but by intelligence, ingenuity, and courage. Elias had shown her that humans, often underestimated, could achieve extraordinary feats when faced with impossible odds. She had come to rely on his judgment, respect his skills, and appreciate his unwavering dedication. The queen also thought of her son, the crown prince, and the empire she had sworn to protect. Her survival was not merely a personal triumph, it was a step toward ensuring the stability and future of her people. She knew that returning safely would allow her to guide her son, strengthen alliances, and confront the rival faction that had ambushed her. But she also knew that she could not accomplish this alone. Elias, the human who had proven his capability and bravery, would be an invaluable ally in the challenges to come. As the days passed, the queen regained her full strength. She walked through the outpost, observing human technology, ingenuity, and the resilience of their people. Each innovation, from heating systems to energy shields, impressed her. She realized that humans, despite their physical fragility, had a capacity for problem-solving, creativity, and courage that was truly remarkable. Elias had embodied all of these qualities, and she recognized that their alliance had the potential to reshape her understanding of the universe. Finally, the day came for her departure. The queen and Elias prepared to leave the outpost and journey back to her empire. Supplies were gathered, paths carefully mapped, and strategies discussed to avoid further threats. The queen felt a mix of anticipation and determination. She was returning not as a victim, but as a survivor, strengthened by her experiences and guided by the ingenuity and courage of a human who had earned her trust. As they traveled through the desert, the queen and Elias encountered minor threats, predators, unstable terrain, and lingering mercenaries. But their combined skills ensured that each challenge was met and overcome. The queen moved with confidence, her strength and agility restored, while Elias employed strategy, ingenuity, and adaptability to navigate hazards. Their partnership had become a seamless blend of intellect, instinct, and determination, demonstrating that cooperation between species could yield extraordinary results. Finally, the borders of the Zarathian Empire came into view. The queen's heart swelled with relief and pride. She had survived impossible odds, crossed a frozen desert, and navigated countless dangers with the help of a human medic. Her return would not only ensure her safety, but also allow her to influence the future of her empire, strengthen her son's position, and confront the rival faction that had betrayed her. Upon entering her territory, the queen was greeted with awe and relief. News of her survival had spread, and her people welcomed her back with respect and admiration. She shared her story of perseverance, highlighting the critical role of Elias, the human who had saved her life. Her account challenged long-held prejudices against humans, showing that intelligence, courage, and ingenuity could surpass appearances or assumptions. Her son, the Crown Prince, listened intently, absorbing the lessons of resilience, cooperation, and trust. He recognized that humans, once dismissed as weak, could become valuable allies. The Queen's experience with Elias had proven that collaboration across species could yield remarkable outcomes, a lesson that would shape future diplomatic and strategic decisions for the Empire. Elias remained by her side, quietly observing the events. He had never sought recognition, yet the Queen ensured that his contributions were acknowledged. She emphasized his ingenuity, courage, and unwavering dedication to survival and partnership. Her praise resonated with her people, challenging stereotypes and fostering a newfound respect for humans. In the following days, the Queen met with advisors, strategists, and military leaders to plan for the future. The knowledge she had gained during her journey, combined with Elias' insights into human strategy and survival, provided a unique perspective. Together, they discussed alliances, defense strategies, and ways to strengthen the empire against internal and external threats. The Queen's experiences on Zithra had transformed her understanding of leadership, resilience, and the potential of cooperation beyond species. Finally, the Queen and Elias shared a moment of quiet reflection. They had endured storms, predators, rival factions, and a frozen desert that seemed impossible to survive. Yet they had done so together, forging a bond built on trust, respect, and shared determination. The Queen acknowledged the extraordinary role Elias had played, and he, in turn, expressed his respect for her resilience, strength, and leadership. The journey had changed them both. The Queen had discovered the remarkable potential of humans, while Elias had witnessed the strength, intellect, and courage of the Zorathian people. Together, they had proven that survival, ingenuity, and cooperation could overcome the harshest conditions and the most formidable challenges. As the queen prepared to return fully to her duties within the empire, she carried with her a renewed sense of purpose, a deep respect for humanity, and the lessons of resilience, courage, and trust that had been forged in the frozen deserts of Zithra. Elias returned to his human outpost, knowing that his actions had left a lasting impact on a civilization far beyond his own, and that the bond they had formed would influence the future of two worlds. In the icy expanse of Zithra, survival had demanded strength, intelligence, and ingenuity, but it had also revealed something deeper: the power of trust, cooperation, and mutual respect. The queen had survived because she had learned to embrace these qualities, and she had discovered that humans, often underestimated, could shine in ways that transcended appearances. Together, they had endured the impossible, proving that even in the harshest corners of the universe, hope, courage, and determination could prevail. The queen's return to her empire marked not an end, but a beginning, a new chapter in which humans and Zorathians could stand as allies, demonstrating that the greatest strength often lay in unity, understanding, and the willingness to overcome differences for the sake of survival and progress. And as Zithra's winds howled across the frozen desert, the legacy of their journey remained, a testament to the extraordinary potential of resilience, ingenuity, and the human spirit.